Every rebellion begins the same way, long before the first sword is drawn, before the first banner is raised. Someone reaches a conclusion. Tomorrow will be worse than today. Wyatt's rebellion was no different. England had entered uncertain times. Only a few years earlier, Henry VIII had transformed the country forever. He had broken with the Pope, declared himself head of the Church in England, ordered monasteries to be dissolved. For centuries the Catholic Church had shaped English life. Now, almost overnight, that old order had begun to disappear. When Henry died, England changed again. His young son, Edward VI, pushed the country further towards Protestantism. Churches changed once more. Services were held in English. Old rituals vanished. For many people, England no longer looked as the country they had grown up in. Then Edward died unexpectedly, suddenly. England faced another turning point. Against enormous political pressure, Henry's eldest daughter Mary secured the throne. She became England's first queen to rule in her own right. Her claim was lawful. Few could challenge it. Yet inheriting a crown and inheriting a united kingdom are two very different things. Mary was a committed Catholic. She made no secret of her intention to restore England's old religion. To many Catholics, this offered hope. To many Protestants, it raised uncomfortable questions. Would England simply return to the past? Or was something even greater about to change? Among those watching events closely was Thomas Wyatt. Not an obscure agitator, not a professional soldier, a respected gentleman from Kent. His father had served Henry VIII with distinction. Wyatt himself had served the Tudor crown. His future depended upon stability. Rebellion promised him nothing, which makes the question all the more fascinating. Why did a man with so much to lose decide to risk everything? The answer began with a marriage. Royal marriages rarely concerned ordinary people. They were diplomatic agreements designed to strengthen kingdoms, secure alliances, prevent wars. Most passed with little more than polite celebration. This one would help push England towards rebellion. Mary announced that she intended to marry Philip of Spain. He was no ordinary prince. Philip was the son of Emperor Charles V, the most powerful Catholic ruler in Europe. His family governed territories stretching across much of Europe and the Americas. To many of Mary's advisors, the marriage made perfect sense. England would gain a powerful ally. Mary would strengthen her position on the throne. Together, they might even secure a Catholic heir. From the Queen's perspective, the marriage was both practical and necessary. Not everyone saw it that way. Many Englishmen had spent 2 decades watching foreign influence weaken while England asserted its independence from Rome. Now, they feared the pendulum was swinging back. Not overnight, not through invasion. Something quieter. The fear that English decisions might one day be made in Spanish palaces. Whether that fear is justified is almost beside the point. Thousands believed it, and history is often driven, not by certainty, by people and what they believe to be true. Religion deepened those fears. England was no longer arguing over taxes and trade. It was arguing over salvation, over worship, over the future of the kingdom itself. Neighbours who had attended the same church for decades now found themselves praying in different ways, believing different things, and imagining very different futures for England. Yet, this was never a simple struggle between good and evil. Many welcomed Mary's plans. Many remained fiercely loyal to their queen. Others opposed the marriage, not the crown. That complexity matters, because Wyatt's rebellion was never simply about religion, or Spain, or even Mary herself. It was about the moment when ordinary people looked towards the future and reached completely different conclusions about what England should become. Quiet conversations became secret meetings. Secret meetings became careful plans. The idea was simple. Several rebellions would begin at the same time. The government would be overwhelmed before it could respond. If everything happened together, the crown might never recover. It was an ambitious plan. It was also an extraordinarily fragile one. Because every conspiracy depends upon a single thing: secrecy. And secrets rarely stay hidden for long. By the beginning of 1554, the conspiracy was ready. The leaders believed they had one chance: strike quickly or lose everything. They didn't realise the government already knew enough to begin fighting back. Word began reaching the government, whether through loose tongues, intercepted messages, or simple suspicion. The crown learnt enough to act. Arrests followed. Questions were asked. Some conspirators disappeared into hiding. Others abandoned the rising altogether. Before a single battle had been fought, the rebellion was already beginning to fracture. Most men would have accepted defeat. Thomas Wyatt did not. He looked at a plan that was falling apart and decided to proceed anyway. That single decision transformed him. No longer a conspirator, now a rebel. Why? Because from Wyatt's perspective, doing nothing now seemed even more dangerous. If Mary married Philip, he believed England's future would be changed forever. If there was ever going to be resistance, it had to happen now. History often asks difficult questions. Wyatt believed history had just asked him one. Wyatt raised his standard in Kent. Supporters began arriving from towns and villages across the county. Not because they all shared identical beliefs. They didn't. Some feared England's return to Catholicism. Some feared Spanish influence. Others trusted Wyatt himself. Many simply believed the moment to act had arrived. Within days, the rebellion had become far larger than the government expected. Imagine standing amongst them. You've left your farm, your workshop, your family. Ahead lies uncertainty. Behind lies treason. If the rebellion fails, there will be no quiet return home. Only imprisonment or the scaffold. But size alone would not decide its success. The crown was already marching to meet it. The government's first response came swiftly. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, marched from London with experienced troops, expecting to disperse the rising before it gathered momentum. Instead, the campaign produced one of its most remarkable moments. Near Rochester, many of Norfolk's own soldiers crossed the lines and joined Wyatt. Whether driven by sympathy, religion, or simply refusal to fight fellow Englishmen, the effect was immediate. The royal advance collapsed. For the rebels, it was an astonishing victory. For Mary, It was proof this could no longer be dismissed as a local disturbance. For the first time, the rebellion appeared capable of succeeding. Meanwhile, inside London, Mary prepared to respond. The rebellion had found its leader. Now, the crown would prove it had one too. Mary had worn the crown for only a few months. Now she faced armed rebellion. Some advisors urged caution. Others feared London itself could not be trusted. There were even suggestions that the Queen should leave the capital altogether. Mary refused. She understood something every ruler eventually learns. A monarch seen fleeing their capital rarely appears stronger the following day. If London lost confidence, the rebellion might gather it. So instead of withdrawing, Mary chose to confront uncertainty directly. She travelled to London's Guildhall. There she addressed the citizens directly. She reminded them that the crown had passed to her lawfully, that she had no intention of abandoning her kingdom, and that she would defend it, not simply as a queen, as England's rightful sovereign. It was exactly what the moment required. The speech mattered, not because words defeat armies, because confidence is contagious. If London believed the Queen remained calm, others might believe it too. One by one, the uncertainty that had helped the rebellion began to shift. Mary also acted quickly. Experienced commanders were appointed. The Queen's defences strengthened. Messages travelled constantly across southern England. Loyal nobles began raising men. The crown was no longer reacting. It had begun taking control. While Wyatt marched forward, Mary gathered strength without moving at all. Both understood something fundamental. Wars are fought by soldiers. They are often won long before the first battle. They are won by persuading people where victory already lies. By now, both leaders had committed themselves. Neither could retreat. The question was no longer whether rebellion had begun. The question was whether Wyatt could reach London before the Queen gathered enough strength to stop him. Wyatt's army continued west. The march itself became a test, not of courage, of endurance. Each passing day brought fresh rumours. London was ready. London was divided. London would welcome them. London would resist. No one knew which stories were true. Yet the column kept moving, not because success looked certain, because stopping guaranteed failure. Every mile carried hope. Every mile also closed another door behind them. Imagine looking back, knowing your home grows further away with every step. Knowing the government already knows your name. That is the reality of rebellion. There comes a point where there is no ordinary life to return to. Meanwhile, the Queen's position improved. More soldiers arrived. Roads were watched. Bridges secured. Every sunrise gave Mary another opportunity to prepare. Time itself had begun fighting on the crown's side. By the beginning of February, Wyatt reached Suffolk. Across the Thames, London stood before him. The towers of the city were clearly visible, close enough to inspire hope, close enough to remind every rebel what they had risked to reach this point. Yet London did not immediately welcome them. The bridges were defended, the gates remained closed. Unable to force a crossing, Wyatt searched for another way into the city. The rebellion still lived. Its momentum had begun to slow.
Wyatt could still win. The rebellion no longer controlled events. Instead, events had begun controlling the rebellion. From a distance, victory can look inevitable. Close up, it rarely does. Wyatt had reached the greatest moment of the rebellion.
Everything now depended upon decisions made over hours, not weeks. Would London rise? Would supporters inside the city open the way? Would uncertainty become opportunity? For a moment, nobody knew.
Then momentum began to slip. Not through one disastrous defeat, through a series of disappointments. Expected support failed to appear. Routes became blocked. Government resistance hardened. Every delay strengthened the Queen. Every hesitation weakened the rebels. History often remembers dramatic turning points. In truth, many rebellions die quietly. One missed opportunity, one delayed decision, one failed expectation at a time. Wyatt's began to unravel in exactly that way.
Forced to abandon Suffolk, Wyatt marched west. Crossing the Thames upstream at Kingston, it was a clever decision. It cost precious time. Time Mary desperately needed. Time Wyatt could scarcely afford. By the time the rebels turned back towards London, the government was ready. On the morning of 7th of February, Wyatt reached Ludgate, one of the western entrances to the City of London. Everything now rested upon one expectation: that supporters inside the city would open the gates. Instead, they remained firmly shut. For a few quiet moments, the rebellion simply stopped. Weeks of planning, weeks of marching, weeks of hope, all confronted by a single closed gate. History rarely provides more powerful images than that.
Soon the questions changed. No longer, can we win? Now, can we survive? Those are very different questions. The rebellion had begun with confidence. It had reached London with hope. Now it faced reality. The outcome was becoming clear. Yet the most dangerous moments were still ahead. Because defeated armies can surrender. Defeated rebellions rarely receive that luxury. The final act would decide not only Wyatt's fate, but Mary's reign itself. Momentum is a difficult thing to recover. Once lost, it rarely returns. Wyatt's army had marched with conviction. Now it found itself surrounded by uncertainty. The opportunities that had once seemed within reach had disappeared. The rebellion's greatest strength, its belief, was beginning to fade.
The initiative had gone. Government soldiers pressed forward. The rebels hesitated. Some drifted away. Others laid down their weapons. The disciplined march from Kent dissolved into confusion. Thomas Wyatt fought on for a short time longer. Then, surrounded and hopelessly outnumbered, he surrendered. The rebellion that had come within sight of London ended within sight of its objective.
The government questioned him relentlessly. It wanted names, confessions, evidence of a wider conspiracy. Wyatt admitted his own role. However, despite immense pressure, he refused to falsely accuse Princess Elizabeth of involvement. Whether motivated by loyalty, conscience, or simple honesty, that decision may have shaped English history more than he could ever have imagined. On the 11th of April 1554, Thomas Wyatt was executed on Tower Hill. His body was later subjected to the punishment reserved for traitors, a brutal reminder of what happened to those who challenged the Tudor crown. The rebellion was over. Mary remained queen. Her marriage to Philip of Spain went ahead. Measured simply by results, Wyatt had failed. Or had he? History often remembers those who won. It should also remember those who forced history to reveal itself. Wyatt didn't wear a crown. He didn't overthrow a government. He didn't stop the marriage he opposed. By almost every immediate measure, his rebellion failed. Yet failure can expose truths that victory often hides. Wyatt's rising revealed how deeply England remained divided. Religion, national identity, the limits of royal authority, the fear of foreign influence. None of those questions disappeared with his execution. If anything, they became even more important. Mary married Philip, yet the marriage produced no heir. When Mary died in 1558, the crown passed peacefully to Elizabeth, the very woman Wyatt had refused to falsely accuse. Under Elizabeth, England once again took a Protestant path. Many of the arguments that had driven Wyatt's supporters did not vanish. History simply carried them forward. One of the reasons this rebellion deserves to be remembered is because both believed they were acting in England's best interests. Mary believed she was restoring the true faith and securing her kingdom. Wyatt believed he was protecting England's future from decisions he feared would place it under foreign influence. They looked at the same country and imagined two completely different futures. Perhaps that is why this story still matters. Not because it tells us who to admire or who to condemn, because it reminds us that history is rarely shaped by simple choices. It is shaped by people making the best decisions they can, with the information they have, while standing under extraordinary pressure. Every rebellion begins with a decision, not to seek glory, not even to seek victory, with the belief that doing nothing would be the greater risk. Thomas Wyatt reached that conclusion. Mary Tudor reached a different one. History remembers them both. The question it leaves for us is how often the people living through history realize they are making it.